Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. College football week 3, the topic on the docket as these teams start to show their true colors and we get a better illustration and indication of who these teams are going to be going forward. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. How goes it, my friend?
It goes on this fine Wednesday morning. How's everything your way?
Everything is good. My life, though, not nearly as rosy and positive as what we saw from the Sun Belt last weekend. Hat tip to the Group of 5 conference. Georgia Southern, outright upset. Marshall goes into South Bend. Appalachian State takes care of business against Texas A&M. Apparently, they are the new MAC, the conference that we grew accustomed to over the years of being the true giant killers.
Ooh, Drew Pine this week. Break out the belly shirts, Notre Dame fans.
Oh, I can't wait. I know we got Brad waiting in the wings. I can't wait to ask him what his takeaways were for that debacle in South Bend last weekend against Marshall. But again, hey, I understand you guys have allegiances, you have fanhoods, but you are bettors first and foremost. It's still not going to stop me from taking pot shots. Busy slate.
Wait,
go ahead.
The thing that was interesting about Notre Dame, and we'll get Brad's take here in a matter of moments, but I think we pegged this correctly. Marcus Freeman has been a great salesman this offseason, right? He's put on the suit. He's went door-to-door knocking. He's signed all these recruits. Let's see if he can keep them. And offensively, there is some certain struggles there. We weren't quite sure if you would see the quarterback play enhance. We thought the offensive line would be the strength. It's not. Defensively, I think we sniffed it out before anybody else, saying that their run defense, when you look metrically, schedule adjusted, was a weakness. And Kayla LeBourne absolutely ran wild last week. Seeing the Marshall front dominate Notre Dame was a little surprising to me. And I just wonder, and this is an interesting question, do you think it's better or worse that Tyler Buckner is out? At least now Freeman can go to the recruits and be like, listen, starting quarterback got injured this year.
I mean,
as an excuse.
Yeah, I mean,
does that help or no?
We already know the direction Notre Dame's going to go in. Didn't they sign Lloyd Carr's grandson? Isn't he supposed to be that 4 or 5-star recruit that everyone has anointed as the next great Notre Dame?
2024, right?
Oh, okay. Then you know what? If I'm him, try and take as many classes as you can, reclassify, and try and join Notre Dame in 2023. But I do think that obviously provides a little bit of an asterisk there. But when you look at Notre Dame, and like you said, we'll get Brad's take. He watches the team much closer than I do. I mean, they haven't looked buttoned up on the offensive line or the defensive line. And for me, I know it gets lost because it's a 2-score game. I thought the way Marcus Freeman handled the final 2 minutes of the game when Notre Dame would have needed an onside kick was probably an indictment of maybe him being in over his head as well as a game manager and a CEO.
Not a lot of experience on that staff, young guys. So let's see what Brad has to say about it.
Hey, one other game, though, I did want to get your take on before we get into all of the marquee matchups that we're going to preview. Alabama, Texas, clearly the biggest game on the schedule. I don't think either of us thought it was going to be competitive, not to the point that it was. Texas, if Quinn Ewers doesn't go down, has a legitimate shot to pull off that upset. Did that say more, in your opinion, about Texas and the direction that program is headed? Or do you think that's more an indictment of Alabama needing players to emerge on the outside? Because we haven't seen wide receivers get blanketed in coverage like that since, Greg McElroy and A.J. McCarron were running the show down there in Tuscaloosa.
What's very interesting about that game for me is the question mark we had about Alabama coming into the season was the receiver group. Burton, who was at Georgia, is a fine player. But if he's your number one, that room's regressed substantially from what we've seen the last 4, 5, 6 seasons out of Alabama receivers. And so it was very clear the one strength we said Texas had defensively was their cornerback group. And I think they played a little bit more man coverage than we had seen in the past, something we said they had to do. I think the most interesting part for me was watching the onset of that game, because to your point, if Quinn Ewers is out there the way he was playing, I think Texas wins that game. But what was shocking was you have a young quarterback like Quinn Ewers. Your research staff, of which there's an abundance of at Alabama, has had to have heard and seen some of the turnover issues he had. And Alabama from the onset didn't make him think, didn't make him go through progressions. It was nothing but one-on-one coverage where we're going to have Quinn Ewers just make a throw 50 yards down the field in one-on-one coverage. That was at least the shocking part to me. I know Alabama's offense was no great shakes. They stumbled and sputtered a little bit against Utah State despite covering that number, stepped up in class, and certainly you have to score points to cover a number that large. But one of the more shocking things as I just watched it unfold was how they elected to defend Quinn Ewers early. Like the guy was just dropping back and throwing one-on-one balls. Saban didn't make him think a lick.
Yeah, and they didn't do much either, not just to confuse the quarterback, to try and confuse an offensive line that's starting a couple of inexperienced pieces there. They thought they were going to be able to get away with the bull rush. And the other thing, uncharacteristic from Alabama, and you can understand it, it's their first true road game in a non-conference setting in quite some time. The amount of penalties, the jumping off sides and everything else, just not what you've grown accustomed to from Alabama. But they do escape with a victory, and as we know, if Alabama runs the table, all of this will be moot with a chance to play in the college football postseason. Texas fans, though, however, you have been warned. We're not quite sure who's going to be starting a quarterback for you this week, but rest assured, UTSA will bring their lunch pail and make you work for 60 minutes, a game that I think 97 people across the country will be able to watch on the Longhorn Network. All right, let's get on to the games themselves. Excited to get into the big games of the college football Week 3 slate, and as always, we welcome in our analyst, Brad Powers, to join the show. And Brad, we're going to have a chance to pick on Payne shortly or get his assessment on Florida State's Friday night game against Louisville. But I'd be remiss as a host here, given some of your tweet in the wake of Notre Dame losing outright to Marshall, your assessment of the first 3 games of the Marcus Freeman era.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I didn't have that many red flags coming into last week. Sure, I mean, you'd like the halftime adjustments to be better than what they were against Oklahoma State and Ohio State, but the reality was that was a pair of top 10 teams. You played away from home and, you know, basically played to expectation against Oklahoma State, exceeded expectation against Ohio State. So much so that the rare chance that I bet on Notre Dame last week, well, I mean, that was pretty much the death knell right there for the Fighting Irish, the fact that I bet on them. I mean, it was legitimate. I mean, you can point to the turnovers, but, I mean, I thought Marshall beat Notre Dame at the line of scrimmage, and to me, that is the most alarming thing, that Notre Dame's perceived strength this year, offense and defensive line for the second week in a row, really manhandled. So not looking good right now at 0-3 in the Marcus Freeman era. But, hey, he can recruit, guys.
Hey, recruiting is the lifeblood of most college football programs, but I'm not sure that'll come as solace to the Texas A&M fan base, who may have the best recruiting class in the country, but didn't stop them from losing to Appalachian State last weekend. Of course, we'll get to A&M later in the show, but had to get your take on the Fighting Irish. We'll see if Marcus Freeman can right the ship there in South Bend and get this team headed in the right direction with a game against Cal, where the Irish are double-digit favorites this weekend. Florida State, Louisville, gentlemen. Let's get right into it. And we're looking at Florida State, a modest 2.5-point favorite on the road. Total on this game sits at 57. Friday nights under the lights at Cardinal Stadium. Louisville will play its first home game of the season. 23rd matchup in the series. The Seminoles have had a commanding lead at 16 wins and 6 losses. Louisville, though, has won each of the last 2 meetings, including a 48-16 victory here the last time the two teams played in Louisville. And Payne, for your Florida State Seminoles, they aim to break a conference season opener drought that stems all the way back to 2017. They're off to their first 2-0 start since 2016. Brad, we'll start with you on this game before we get a little bit of homerism from Payne. When you look at Florida State's power number coming into the season, how much has it changed in the wake of a dominating win against Duquesne, where they did come up short from odds makers' expectations, but they get that neutral/true road win victory outright against LSU over the holiday weekend?
I've upgraded them for obvious reasons. I mean, I got them up a couple of points from where I had Florida State at the start of the season. I've been impressed. Obviously, I think Jordan Travis has grown as an overall quarterback, throwing the football, decision-making, pocket awareness. I've been impressed with the running backs as far as, they got some depth there. They run really hard. They're not overly, big as far as stature, but, I mean, they run really hard for their size. Offensive line is held up. I mean, I was really concerned in the LSU game, although maybe a couple of, the injury to LSU's best defensive lineman, then, a guy getting kicked out of the game for spearing, basically targeting, probably helped Florida State's cause in that game. But generally speaking, I mean, Jared Verse from the FCS transfer from Albany has given him a decent pass rush. I mean, it's been pretty positive for the Noles. The best team they've had. I know it's not saying much, but it's the best team that they had right now since 2016.
Hey, progress. And Payne, Brad mentioned the offensive line for Florida State. Of course, that group's going to look a little bit different. Bless Harris lost for the season. Does this team have enough depth to continue to find success on the ground and allow Jordan Travis' efficiency to get better and better as a passer? I mean, the game against LSU, they accumulated nearly 70% of all available offensive yards, which has to be a silver lining with an extra week to prepare for this contest.
The offensive line is certainly been beaten and battered, but that was the one thing they made sure to do this offseason was enhance the floor, enhance the depth of the unit, and so far that's proved to be a big thing. Washington is coming back, working his way in, so that provides your sixth guy. But past him, the depth is starting to dwindle, not just with Bless Harris gone, but Caden Lyles was lost before the start of the season. That unit's actually holding up quite well, and the surprise, shocking candidate was the man they signed late in the recruiting process was Jazteen Turrentine. He was a guy that played at South Carolina. He's had some high peaks, but he certainly hasn't always been in shape, and his lows are really low. To this point, Alex Atkins has gotten him to buy in a little bit, and he's been very good for them at right tackle. So we'll see if that continues. But the offensive line has certainly been improved over the years, especially with Alex Atkins and the way he's recruiting right now. I think that unit continues to improve over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, Florida State, we knew it was going to be a slow process to try and rebuild. A win here would be absolutely massive to kick things off in earnest as far as getting that first conference win. And when you're talking about a Louisville team, hey, the Cardinal haven't gone out there and absolutely dominated their opponents. They did look significantly more buttoned up in their win last weekend against UCF, where they leaned on their defense in a 20-14 victory, a far cry from the 31-7 debacle at the hands of the Syracuse Orange to kick things off. And Brad, when you look at Louisville, I mean, their coaching staff hasn't shied away from what their biggest problem has been, and it's 9.5 penalties per game, ranking 12th in the ACC, 118th in the FBS, while they're 73 penalty yards per game, dead last in the league, and 107th nationally. When you look at this Louisville offense, at least through the first two games, Malik Cunningham was supposed to be the stalwart, the constant, allow him to facilitate. He was open and honest. He said the coaching staff worked with him this offseason as far as becoming a pocket passer, said he was reluctant to run, appeared to feel more comfortable against UCF. But how do you approach Scott Satterfield's bunch, a team that's recruiting better and there's reason to be optimistic about the future, but clearly a side that would love to make a statement in their home opener?
Yeah, I mean, obviously some mixed signals from Louisville's offense so far. Obviously did not have a good performance in week one against Syracuse. The talk all offseason was we want, Cunningham to stay in the pocket. We don't want him running as much. We need him to be healthy all season. And the reality is, even though it feels like he's, starting his seventh season as a starting quarterback in college football, very inconsistent still as a passer, no matter how much they worked on it. I mean, I go back to the play in last week's game. I mean, I was stunned as far as the decision to go for it on like a 4th and 5 at your own 45. Now, the play call ended up being really good. Had a guy wide open in the flat. Cunningham missed it. Inaccurate pass. And you can say that the guy dropped it, but the reality was it was behind him. So a lot of inconsistency from Cunningham still as a passer. The positive, though, and the reason they ended up winning that game and winning the second half was he went back to doing what he does best, running the football. Made a big touchdown run, ran for over 100 yards like he's consistently done. So I think they're going to probably need Louisville's offense Cunningham to run it, especially when you look back at the LSU-Florida State game and see an FSU defense that struggled containing Jaden Daniels running the ball. So I would be very surprised if we don't see Cunningham running it on Friday night.
You led me perfectly, Brad, and that's the last thing I want to ask you, Payne, on this contest. Florida State having seen Jaden Daniels, a mobile quarterback, one that probably is a little bit more adept at throwing and getting receivers involved. We know LSU's receiver room is significantly better than what Florida State will encounter here against Louisville. You've now had 2 weeks to digest the film. Florida State has struggled with mobile quarterbacks. Do you think the extra time will only pay dividends for them to try and contain Cunningham and make him a pocket passer?
I'm extremely nervous about this game. This is going to be tougher than what it appears on the surface. I mean, Brad hit this perfectly in that Louisville's kind of been in a fog the first 2 games against Syracuse and UCF, but this is the home opener at night. It's a packed house. It's against an undefeated Florida State team. The energy is certainly going to increase, and we haven't seen that energy from the onset in either of the games against UCF or Syracuse. And I think the key factor to this game is how Florida State elects to defend Malik Cunningham, because in the second half, when you were facing an 0-2 start to the season, all of a sudden we're going to put the ball down and let Malik Cunningham's legs go. And if you've watched the last 2 matchups, Florida State's defensive coordinator, Adam Fuller, has been absolutely owned by Malik Cunningham and Satterfield. If you go to the 2020 game, the game plan Adam Fuller devised led Malik Cunningham to having a positive 1.72 EPA per pass in the first half. He was actually accurate in that game. A positive 1.7 EPA per pass in the second quarter. Literally every time Malik Cunningham dropped back to pass in the first half of that 2020 game, Louisville was expected to score 1.7 points or more per pass. Louisville scored 31 in the first half. He has owned Florida State's defense. You go to 2021 at home, a year after Adam Fuller gets to see what's on tape, right? He comes up with a new game plan. Malik goes out 0.73 EPA per pass in the first quarter, a positive 0.68 EPA per pass in the second quarter. Again, 31 points in the first half. Louisville's ended these games in the first half the last 2 years. So your hope is that you get 2 very good data points to draw from, because both Syracuse and UCF did slow Louisville's offense down. But so far, FSU hasn't faced a quarterback without deficiencies. Certainly Cunningham isn't perfect, right? We know that. But when he's in form and can make some rhythm throws, he's tough to stop. And that continues to be an area of concern for me. I don't think it is to the outside world. But Kevin Knowles has been horrific in the slot. Amarion Cooper has, 10-plus days to get healthy, but I doubt he's 100% still. He gutted it out in the LSU game, but clearly wasn't nearly 100% healthy. Got beat for the touchdown late there. It would not shock me if there's a few coverage busts here. And I think my fear is that, Adam Fuller might not be comfortable moving Dent or Robinson into the box to help create that extra man advantage to stop the ground game if he doesn't trust his corners. And I know Brad mentioned Jared Verse at the top. He's been fantastic getting pressure on the quarterback, still a little undisciplined with his eyes and can get out gapped. So the read option stuff could put Verse out of position a little bit. And we saw that against Jaden Daniels. Some of those runs that he came around the end on was because Verse got upfield a little bit too much. Dennis Briggs still working his way back into football shape. That's a guy FSU needs to start playing well at end. He hasn't really shown anything through 2 games. And then you mentioned Jaden Daniels, the success he had on the ground. More than 1 expected point per rush, over 10 yards a carry against Florida State. I think we know Malik Cunningham has had great success against FSU with his legs. And then we kind of hit on this in the opener against LSU. It wasn't just Malik Cunningham last year. You go back to the Syracuse game. Garrett Schrader, 143 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. The week after that, Sam Howell, positive 1.2 EPA per rush, 111 rushing yards. So this is something that's really hindered Florida State's defense over the last few years with Adam Fuller in charge. And there's no excuses this week, right? Like, you've seen this offense back-to-back weeks. You think about the process of this preparation, right? You had Jaden Daniels, so you prepare for a mobile quarterback. You had a bye week. Then you have another week preparing for a team that you've seen multiple times over the last couple weeks. This is like 3-4 weeks now preparing for a mobile quarterback. The other thing here is look at the staff, look at some of the players. Randy Shannon was the starting linebacker coach, or was the linebacker coach at UCF. You have Tatum Bethune, who was a starting linebacker at UCF. My understanding is there's some ties to UCF. There's been some exchanging of notes this week on how to prepare for Malik Cunningham and the things that they did well last week to combat Malik Cunningham. And hopefully some of those things get implemented. If not, you're not going to get that 3-0 start.
A big measuring stick, no doubt, to see how far along Mike Norvell is in his progress in Tallahassee, and if Louisville can erase that 0-1 start in ACC play with a big home win against Florida State, a game that during the summer months would have had Louisville right around a field goal favorite. We've obviously seen that number flip with the total taking a little bit of over money. On to Saturday, my friends, as we'll head up to the Pacific Northwest, where it's the Oregon Ducks welcoming in the BYU Cougars. Oregon, a consensus 3.5-point favorite in this match. There are a couple of 4s out there as well. Total in this contest been bet up a touch from 55.5 on the low open, upwards of 57.5, 58. Obviously, very different results for these two teams a week ago. Oregon gets right in a dismantling of Eastern Washington. Meanwhile, BYU outlasts Baylor, much to the chagrin of the three of us and our loyal Bet the Board podcast listeners, because college kickers can't make field goals inside of 40 yards, but I digress. When you look at BYU, this is a program that's 3-19 on the road against ranked teams this century, 2-3 over the last 5. Obviously, as Kalani Sitake has upgraded the overall power profile, things have gotten significantly better. The last trip for BYU to Autzen Stadium came back in 1990. They were upset as a top 10 team, and it was Ty Detmer en route to winning the Heisman Trophy that was intercepted 5 times. Why is that relevant? Well, it's probably not 30 years later, but it's actually the last time that BYU beat a top 10 team at home like they did last week against Baylor and fell completely flat. When you look at Oregon, first time the Ducks are hosting a ranked opponent in Eugene since Washington came here in 2018. They'll put their 20-game home winning streak on the line, the third longest in FBS, 29 straight victories against non-conference opponents. And Brad, I think when we start with power numbers for these two teams, obviously BYU went out there, proved their mettle. We know why that number came down with 2 of their top receivers unavailable to go against Baylor. But I'm more interested in Oregon. What did you do as far as the Ducks were concerned after you watched them get dismantled week 1 against a very good Georgia Bulldog side?
Well, I mean, obvious downgrade. I mean, because the expectation was not for him to lose by 6 touchdowns and not have a clue on the defensive side of the ball, where Dan Lanning kind of, obviously that's his forte, coming over from Georgia as a defensive coordinator. And I'll say this, even with a 70-14 win over what an FCS team in Eastern Washington that typically is among the top 10 FCS teams in the country, I'm not sure that's the case this year. But I still have Oregon down as far as where they were at the start of the season to where they are right now, down about a point overall. With that being said, I'm not sure either data point's that great for Oregon. I mean, they play an overmatched opponent last week that I think's down a little bit. And obviously week 1, they just get manhandled by, Kirby Smart said it, and Georgia has much better players. So I think this is the game where we truly get a first solid data point on what Oregon's going to be here in 2022. And as much as I could say about the Oregon team, I'm not sure what to make of them yet. Same with Bo Nix, their transfer quarterback. No surprise we get a bad Bo 1 week against Georgia. We had good Bo Nix last week, looking good, sharp, 28 out of 33, 5 touchdowns, 0 picks. So this is a game where my power ratings actually say BYU is holding some value, but spot, like you mentioned it earlier, Todd, says that this looks like more like an Oregon spot.
It's always fascinating when we go through the mental gymnastics as handicappers. We do the work during the summer months. You look for those data points that you can lean on. But to your point, Brad, I mean, we have such opposite ends of the spectrum for Oregon that this may be the true litmus test for what the Ducks are going to be going forward. A team that I don't think had national championship aspirations, but would obviously love to be irrelevant in the Pac-12 conference when they get into league play. And you look at BYU, clearly they'll have the attention of the Ducks. BYU ran roughshod over their 5 Pac-12 opponents that they faced a season ago. Payne, Brad mentioned Bo Nix, and we obviously have a love-hate relationship with Bo around this very podcast. And when you look at Bo, he's 15-4 in his career at home, 28 passing touchdowns to just 2 interceptions, just 7-10 in all other games, and a 16 touchdown to 16 interception ratio. This will be Nix's 15th game of his career against a top 15 opponent. The numbers, well, they're not great, my friend. 3-11 from a straight-up standpoint. He's completed 54.7% of his passes for a shade less than 2,800 yards, but the raw numbers sound great, but it's less than 200 yards per game, 8 touchdowns, 13 picks, and the yards per attempt. I'm not even going to heap more things on his shoulders. When you look at the Oregon offense, Bo Nix they brought in expecting him to stabilize the quarterback spot. This is the kind of game where he's got to be at his best. Are you optimistic or are you concerned about his command of the Oregon offense?
I think Brad hit it perfectly on the 2 data points being interesting and tough to evaluate. You can't completely remove the Georgia data point, but I don't think anyone believed game 1, hostile environment, brand new quarterback, brand new system, brand new OC calling the biggest game of his life against a Kirby Smart defense and use that as the barometer for the Ducks offense moving forward. And even within that 46-point whooping, right, there's some positives. Oregon was able to move the ball a little bit early. The adjusted scoring margin was roughly 2 touchdowns better than the 46-point loss. Georgia's offense built such a lead that Oregon kind of had to abandon the run and become one-dimensional, but 42% of the Ducks carries gained 5 or more yards against Georgia. The Ducks O-line to this point has created some holes through 2 games, 3.7 adjusted line yards created. I'm not sure Oregon has an elite back on the roster, but it's a nice trio with Irving, Dollars, and Cardwell. And then all signs are pointing towards Ryan Walk returning this week as a starting guard, which is nice. I think we've outlined Bo Nix, to your point, many times. He's won us some games. He's lost us some games. He's just a different human at home. And I think Autson's going to be rocking here. And sure, like quarterback play is going to be substantially better at home at a college level where there's a little bit more fragile mind states, let's call it. But Bo Nix, if you look, completion percentage nearly 8% better at home. Yards per pass attempt increased 2 full yards. And the turnovers subside, right? At home, Nix more than a 6-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. On the road, more picks than touchdown passes. So that's going to be interesting here. The other element, Sataki, from what we saw last week, broke out the Rolodex, right? Like something we hadn't really seen in the past to beat Baylor. He showed more aggressiveness and some of the looks he used up front. There were more guys in the box. You look at his blitz rate, 38% blitz rate on Blake Shapen dropbacks, pressured on more than 34% of those dropbacks. Those are 2 things that he really hadn't shown a willingness to do all that often, but he changed it up and it led to 10 negative plays created for BYU's defense. So now that that's on film, Oregon's going to be able to, adapt and adjust a little bit. BYU also did a really good job mixing coverages once they realized Baylor didn't really have much juice outside with their receiving core, and the top receiver for Baylor was kind of in and out of the lineup all game. And BYU really mixed their coverages. They used 3 at roughly the same rate, about a third of the time. I do think what's interesting here is seeing what Kenny Dillingham comes up with. I think you throw out the Georgia game. It's certainly nice to gain your confidence back against Eastern Washington, but that's not like this end-all be-all data point. This game against BYU is an opponent that's in your exact weight class. Let's see if Kenny Dillingham can devise an offensive game plan that provides some type of sustainability drive to drive, because what we're hearing now as we see Mike Norvell take over the offense and actually call plays. Certainly there's a brain fart pitch around the goal line to LSU, but the guy was in his bag all game long, and we're immediately seeing consistency from FSU's offense this year, down to down, drive to drive, whereas last year it's like we're just going to run the ball into the line of scrimmage and hope we can manufacture some explosives. As soon as Norvell took over play calling, the offense just looks dramatically different. And some of the things that Florida State was doing last year, I saw implemented early on this year, and it makes me a little concerned. I think Kenny Dillingham has all the connections in the world to be a great recruiter, but this is really him taking over his first offense and calling plays, and so that makes me a little bit hesitant, but this is a great barometer for Kenny Dillingham.
When we look at the other side of the ball, gentlemen, obviously Jaron Hall had some brilliant throws. In the win against Baylor, he, of course, also caught a momentum-leading touchdown catch on a little bit of trickeration from the BYU offense. He went into that contest without his top 2 receivers. It didn't appear to matter as Chase Roberts really emerged as the go-to threat. Now, this is a BYU offense that probably doesn't have the same physically imposing ground game, with Chris Brooks being the lead back instead of Tyler Algier like we saw a season ago. When you start to look at that side of the ball, Brad, for BYU matched up against the Oregon defense, how do you begin to assess those 2 units?
Well, I think you mentioned it, Todd. there was some legitimate concerns about BYU's ability to be effective through the air last week without their top 2 wide receivers, 2 guys that are relatively good. And let's face it, BYU's not Alabama or some of these other SEC programs that, to have so much, talented depth sitting behind guys like that. And look, I like to think that I know a lot of players in college football. I did not know who Chase Roberts was, guys. I did not know that he was capable of getting 122 yards. He had 15 targets. They weren't afraid to go right to him. He catches a big touchdown pass. He throws for a touchdown pass. I was not aware that BYU had somebody like that outside their top 2 wide receivers. Major reason why that one didn't necessarily come home last week. So Jaron Hall has, over the last couple of years, improved as a playmaker and has improved as a passer. So that's a little feather in the cap for BYU. You also mentioned it, and I think this is a game where I think Oregon can maybe get after BYU a little bit there. I like a couple of their edge rushers, and that'll be interesting to see if, how do they play BYU? Do they force Jaron Hall to beat them through the air? Especially because I'm getting the sense that BYU is going to be without their top 2 wide receivers again, or do they drop 8 guys in coverage and allow BYU to run it a little bit? And BYU hasn't been as successful running it like they've been the last couple of years. So I'm not quite sure. Again, it goes back to the data points with Oregon. I'm not necessarily sure how they're going to attack BYU right now.
Payne, is this the weekly part of the show where we talk about Oregon's defense that we get our Justin Flo slander?
Well, Chase Roberts is actually Eric Roberts' son, and he was conceived after a trip to Joshua Tree with Vince and Ari. I don't know if you knew that or not, but Jaron Hall is to me a really he's a team leader, right? Guys look to him. They love him. If you watched that game closely, he didn't celebrate after the overtime win against Baylor. Instead, he searched out his kicker who missed 2 chip shots to kind of console him. And that's really what's elevated, I think, this locker room at BYU. Jaron Hall's arm talent is there. He couldn't have handed the ball off any better to Chase Roberts in the back of the end zone for that momentum score 2 seconds before the half last week. The passing metrics aren't necessarily matching the hype. Again, it's a small sample. He has as many turnover-worthy plays as passing touchdowns. He's really struggled under pressure, which Brad hit perfectly. 2.8 yards per pass attempt when pressured so far this season. And for a guy that's extremely mobile and has a rocket for an arm, Hall hasn't really attacked when pressures come. All told, 51 passer rating under pressure so far. BYU's offensive line through 2 games, I think, has been a little bit of a disappointment, especially in the context of returning 7 of 8 guys that started last season. Right now, BYU 73rd in the country in run blocking, churned out a 26% rushing success rate against Baylor, created just 1.5 yards per rush before contact. So BYU has got to find some success on the ground. And going back to maybe finding some positives in the whipping against Georgia, the Ducks defense only allowed 2.1 yards per rush before first contact against Georgia, right? That's better than the national average rate against a far better opponent than average, obviously, right? If you can do that against BYU this week, I think there's some interesting elements here. And when you look metrically, I think there's a lot of key contributors for Oregon's defense that they were relying on that haven't quite taken a Dan Lanning system yet, right? Noah Sewell, Mace Funa, Sam Tiami. They have played well below expectation to this point, and you would think there's only one direction for their play to go, but it's going to go up. Then you have BYU still having some of those questions at receiver. Puka hasn't practiced yet this week. Gunnar Romney did an interview, and while he didn't say he wouldn't play against Oregon, Romney didn't sound overly optimistic. He kind of iterated that doctors haven't even cleared him yet to practice. And Chase Roberts was great, but freshmen we know can kind of be fickle. And sometimes when you're at home in front of a great crowd, it's a different vibe than when you're on the road. And you look at Chase Roberts, I don't think he can replicate last week. He was responsible for more than 39% of BYU's total yards in both of the pre-overtime touchdowns. And I think what's interesting here, Todd, and I know we talked about it a little bit off air, so I'll let you kind of finish the thought, but markets always give you indicators at times if you can read them. BYU couldn't have looked any better the last 2 weeks, exceeded odds maker expectations despite some receivers being down. Oregon in the spotlight game to open the season, gets drubbed by 46, and yet this line's virtually the same line it was days before the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen wholesale changes for a lot of these numbers in a game we're actually going to get to a little bit later in the show. We'll illustrate how much perception and overall power numbers for the odds-making community have changed one game upwards of 10 points. We discussed it last week with Iowa State, 13 points projected during the summer. Game is in that 3.5 range, but this one, to your point, BYU gets that top 10 win against Baylor. Oregon looks absolutely inept in their season opener, and here we are with Oregon still remaining a 3.5, 4-point favorite, exactly as we would have forecasted coming into the season. So should be an interesting game, a little bit unusual to see BYU play during daylight hours, and Kalani Sitake even said that, so you'd hope that the fans at Autzen can make things more difficult for a BYU team that I'm sure would love to keep their dominance together for Pac-12 opponents. You can follow Brad on Twitter. That's at BradPowers7. You can follow Payne there as well, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me on Twitter. Most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. And normally we go in betting index order. We'll bounce around the board as we try and go through rather than chronological, but wanted to take a slight divergence in the middle of the show to a vacation hotbed in Myrtle Beach, where, Brad, you've apparently identified a little bit of opportunity in a non-Powers 5 game between Buffalo and Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, so not only opportunity for this week, but also a couple of nice teaching moments that I think you can get from this handicap and where we've seen the market move on this game. It's Buffalo and Coastal Carolina. And before we talk about this game specifically, I think we go to last week for both teams. And I just see this year after year after year. I think the market downgrades FBS teams way too much for losing outright to FCS teams, having no clue where that FCS team stands, in the FCS world. Well, last week it got a lot of pub because Buffalo lost on a Hail Mary play to Holy Cross. I'm here to tell you, I didn't downgrade Buffalo that much. I mean, they were only a 6-point favorite in the game. I bet Holy Cross in the game, so I wasn't that surprised that Holy Cross won. In fact, I thought Buffalo was playing all right. The fact that it looked like it was going to go to overtime. So not that big of a downgrade for me for Buffalo last week, even though they lost to a really good FCS team, a top 20 FCS team. So keep that in the back of your head. Meanwhile, on the other side, Coastal Carolina to me should have been severely punished for their performance against an FCS team last week. They're a 32-point favorite against Gardner-Webb. And I get it. Coastal's had the last 2 seasons have been great for Coastal. They beat Army in the opener. They got their quarterback back. They still have the same head coach. A lot of optimism in that regard. I'm here to tell you that was about as bad of a performance as any team in a big favorite role this year. They legitimately, Coastal, should have lost the game outright. In fact, I think Bill Connolly does the post-game win expectancy rate for the game. He graded Coastal at 18%. If you read the box score and assume, you take some things out, 18%, the Coastal had a chance of winning that game. They got outgained by 150 yards, +3 in turnovers. I downgraded Coastal significantly in my power ratings from that one. A Coastal deep pass defense is allowing every time players drop back to pass nearly 13 yards per pass attempt this year. Dead last in the country. Buffalo can throw it. We've seen the markets really attack this game big time. It's been a big mover. I'm here to tell you, even after a 5-point move, my numbers are still strong on Buffalo here. So I like Buffalo +14, and keep an eye on fading Coastal in the future, especially if that pass defense performs so poorly. So I think it's an opportunity maybe to start fading Coastal, not only this week, but multiple weeks.
Holy Cross, by the way, gentlemen, a lovely campus in Worcester, Massachusetts, about 40 minutes west of Boston. Driven through there plenty. When you look at Buffalo, to your point, Brad, it's interesting because you go back to the Bulls season opener against Maryland. They took money against them, driving that number from 21 to 24. And I think when you look at Maryland, I was a little bit surprised they weren't able to move the ball more effectively in that game. So it may speak to Buffalo being a little bit more stout defensively. And those are kind of the things that you're looking for, knowing they should have some success moving the football against Coastal Carolina in this spot. But you brought up FBS teams losing outright to FCS teams. I got to pick on you again. Do you want to defend your alma mater for losing outright as a 10.5-point favorite against Eastern Kentucky and arguably the best game of the day that went 37 overtimes?
No, I was happy because, had mixed emotions. I bet Eastern Kentucky pre-flop in the game. I thought it was going to be much, more competitive than at least a 10-point spread would indicate. But I did need Bowling Green for a season win total to pull that one through at one point in the 7 overtime marathon because now my season win total of over 3.5 that I loved, now it's come into question. I'm in trouble now, guys, on that one.
Hey, you never know, Brad. I've watched enough MAC football for the first 2 weeks. We may not get a single non-conference win from the entire league against a Power 5 opponent. So Bowling Green losing to Eastern Kentucky shouldn't quiet any of the optimism you may have going forward. And who knows, maybe they get Marshall at the exact right time. So for all the disgust and animosity you had towards Marshall a week ago, that can be erased if Bowling Green can pull off the outright upset this week against the Thundering Herd. But from the East Coast back to the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest, where Washington will welcome in a Big Ten opponent in the Michigan State Spartans, you're looking at the Washington Huskies, a 3.5-point favorite in this game, total up from the open, 54 out to 56.5. This will mark just Michigan State's 6th trip to the Far West for a regular season game in the past 35 years. The Spartans are 0-5 in the other trips. Last time it actually happened, they went down to Tempe, resulted in a 16-13 loss to Arizona State in 2018. Michigan State goes to Seattle coming off of its largest margin of victory in a shutout since 1957. 6 degrees of separation for the MAC. They beat the Zips 52-0, and they've outscored 2 MAC teams so far this year, 87-13. Meanwhile, Washington, they haven't exactly played a murderer's row in their 2 victories either, coming off consecutive season-opening 20-point wins for the first time since 2016, when it actually went to the college football playoff. Pump the brakes, Huskies fans. I'm not saying this team is going to have the same fate, but it's definitely reason for optimism to kick off the Kalen DeBoer era when you score 45 against Kent State, taking your foot off the gas. You pummel Portland State. 72 players saw snaps versus the Vikings on Sunday, and the reason that's so relevant, Washington scored more than 31 points just once in a game all of last season. Brad, we talked a little bit about markets moving, and this is probably the biggest indicator of changes after only a few data points. Early summer numbers had Michigan State nearly a touchdown road favorite for this trip. We're now seeing Washington having been bet through the key number of 3 out to 3.5.
Yeah, and I'm surprised by that. I'm not surprised because I've upgraded Washington, and I was normally originally pessimistic about Washington early on in the process. We're talking, late spring, early summer. As I continued to read a little bit more, I knew I was probably on the wrong end as far as being a little bit more pessimistic about Washington. They've clearly exceeded expectations, even though they played a couple of tomato cans. But I think you mentioned it. I don't justify this big of a line move. I mean, when you take a look at both the teams, both are 2-0. Both have played a couple tomato cans. Both have covered both games. They played pretty much the same strength of schedule for both teams. Then you start diving into statistics. Michigan State outscored their opponents by 37 points per game. Washington, 36 points per game. Now, Washington, if you look at the YPP and the yards per game, a little bit more dominant. So I get that, but I don't justify blowing through a very key number of 3 here, not according to my power ratings. So I'm a little bit surprised that we've seen so much more money continue to flow here on the Huskies.
Payne, you've been the ringleader for supporting Kalen DeBoer. We talked about this hire being underrated throughout the course of the offseason. He obviously brought in a quarterback he was familiar with from his time at Indiana in Michael Penix, and early returns are extremely promising. Offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb deserves a ton of credit as well. Has called 2 great games where the Huskies have scored on 15 of their 21 drives so far. They scored the first 6 drives of the game against Kent, first 4 drives against Portland State, and 7 drives have traveled at least 72 yards, so they're not getting cheap points. Obviously, you were a detractor of John Donovan. We love those first half unders when he decided to run into a brick wall. Have you been surprised things have taken off as quickly for this Huskies offense? And do you think they're up to the task facing a Michigan's defense that, quite frankly, leaves a lot to be desired, especially against the pass?
It's a good question. Washington, to me, probably made the largest coaching upgrade of any team this offseason. And we did bang the drum on the preview podcast for Kalen DeBoer. I think that's a home run hire. He's a really good offensive mind. He's won or improved every team he's been a part of. And once he leaves, those teams downtrend. It's just crystal clear DeBoer knows what he's doing. In the 2 games so far this season, Washington scored 38% of the points it scored in 12 games last season. Okay, that I understand the competition hasn't been great, but it's at least an indicator that he knows what he's doing offensively, and he brought in a familiar face to run the offense with Penix. They spent time together at Indiana and were responsible for that 2019 breakout season. Penix knows the offense. He knows the terminology, so I think that's allowed them to hit the ground running a little bit quicker than you would normally expect for a first-year head coach. But you go back to that 2019 Hoosier season, Penix adjusted accuracy was 80% in DeBoer's offense, averaged 8.6 yards per pass attempt, had more than a 3-to-1 touchdown pass to turnover worthy play rate. So it's not shocking he's picked things up that quickly. The receiver group we knew was super talented, but they were just young. Through 2 games, though, you look, despite crap field position, Washington's offense, 59% success rate. The ground game's been efficient. Lots of quality possessions that Penix has turned into touchdowns, 6 points per trip inside the opponent 40 thus far. Now, Michigan State's defense is going to be the toughest test so far, but there is some positives there because it looks like you get a little bit healthier at receiver this week with Rome returning. I think that, just in itself is a wide receiver core that I think a lot of people are maybe not understanding how good they actually are. It's just super talented. We knew coming into the season, the area of concern was Michigan State's secondary, so you have that nice little matchup there with a team that wants to be pass first. Sparty right now has struggled, at least through the early part of the season when you look at the schedule-adjusted metrics. And then coming into the year, it was a team that was had the largest defensive run-pass dichotomy in terms of efficiency. 9th in EPA per rush allowed last year, but 89th in EPA per pass for the Spartans. That forced Mel Tucker into coaching the secondary this season, wanted to be hands-on, so he added that to his cap that he was going to be the defensive backs coach. And then there was some injury news that kind of swings in the favor of Washington's offense as well. You have all first-team Pac-12 left tackle Jackson Kirkland, who's going to plan on playing. Not sure if he starts, right? Troy Fontenot has been damn good, but that would be a good get back for either depth or moving someone around and enhancing that O-line as well. And then you look at Sparty's defense, they're dealing with 2 significant injuries. Xavier Henderson got injured in the opener. Word is it's a meniscus, 3-week recovery time, hasn't practiced. Mel Tucker says he's extremely sore. Darius Snow, Sparty's starting linebacker, is out for the season. Rotational interior lineman Jacob Slade is a game-time decision after an injury last week. So the matchup on this side of the ball would point towards Washington having some success through the air, getting a couple guys back at receiver and on the O-line while Sparty's losing some key cogs defensively.
When we look at the other side of the ball, Brad, obviously they're not immune to injuries either. Jaden Reed, the biggest question mark for Michigan State. Will he or won't he be out there to try and help Payton Thorne in the passing attack? And why that's so important, when you read between the lines, and some of the quotes from Payton Thorne was flat out honest. He said, it's definitely a work in progress, building relationships with the receivers. We're still looking to get better with our connections for receivers not named, Jaden Reed. Meanwhile, Michigan State, they reloaded at the running back position. They bring in two transfers in Jalen Berger and Jarek Broussard. Not quite performing to the level of Kenneth Walker through their first 2 games, but we'll see if they ultimately get there. When you look at Michigan State's offense, Sparty has only had 21% of their drives grade out explosive against MAC teams, and less than half have accumulated 2 first downs or more. We know Washington's defense was poised to take a step back with an emphasis being placed on the offensive side, but what do you think we should be looking for on this side of the ball with Payton Thorne and company matched up against that Huskies defense?
Probably a little bit more ground oriented for this particular game because, even with the injuries, take them out of the context. I think Thorne's disappointed as far as not only completion percentage, he's thrown 3 picks. I go back to the Western Michigan game. The final looks good because, Michigan State covered a majority of the numbers there, but the reality was entering the fourth quarter, that was 21-13. And against the Western Michigan team that I downgraded significantly in this offseason. So it hasn't been that good. Last week, I mentioned in my notes, I don't treat Akron as a MAC team. They're more like an FCS team. So I don't look too much into the 52 points that they put on the board last week. Akron's terrible. So I would expect them to lean a little bit more on the ground game for this particular game. You mentioned they hit the transfer portal once again. Looks like that's going to be okay, and maybe not as explosive as last year like they had with Walker, but that would be my expectation here, but with the question marks at wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that game against Western Michigan, and when it was 21-13, it looked like Western was even going to get closer, having a chance to cut it to 21-17. They had a touchdown pass called back, settled for a field goal, and then things kind of snowballed them late, and we talk about it all the time. Dig into those box scores. Don't just be scoreboard watching for misleading finals to try and identify a little bit of value. Payne, what are some of the things you're looking for on this side of the ball, knowing that Washington will obviously step up in class, and while it will be a jolt to the system for them offensively against Sparty's defense, the same can be said for their stop unit that'll get their first true test.
I would echo your guys' sentiments in that Michigan State's offense to this point hasn't looked great. Peyton Thorne struggled with ball placement, 62% adjusted accuracy rate against Akron and Western Michigan. We did see a little tempo from Sparty last week, ran 80 snaps, so that's something to keep in mind. It does feel like Sparty should be able to move the ball, right? Washington's defense feels very pieced together. Guys in the front seven that are key contributors are either returning from big injuries or just haven't really proven to be great yet. The secondary lost 2 top 40 picks in McDuffie and Kyler Gordon, so there's depth lacking in that area. There's a real possibility, to Brad's point, that Sparty's just able to move the ball on the ground, and that'll allow Peyton Thorne to throw with play action, which is when he's actually at his best. Washington, through 2 games, and I know they've had some backups in there because those games leaked into garbage time, specifically their most recent contest, but they've only stuffed 9% of runs through 2 games. Defensive line has given up 3.3 line yards per rush, one of the worst schedule-adjusted rates in the country. And I think what's scary about this is the level of competition played through the first 2 weeks. And then Washington wasn't very good in this area last season. So is this just a sign of things to come? Washington was outside the top 110 in line yards, opportunity rate, stuff rate, and power success rate. That led to Washington being outside the top 100 in EPA per rush last year. You would see teams literally change their game plan to attack this area weakness, and their run rate increased 8% over average against Washington. Now, I know the defensive system's a little bit different, but again, some of these metrics are indicating that area might not be vastly improved. You guys mentioned Broussard and Berger. It's a nice tandem. They're kind of picking up where Kenneth Walker left off, but there have been some instances where Sparty struggled in short yardage situations, so the O-line needs to play a little bit better here. But if Michigan State gets the ground game going, Peyton Thorne throwing with play action has the ability to hit some explosives against a secondary that, again, doesn't have depth or doesn't have the premium quality talent it had last year. If you look at Thorne's ADOT last season with play action, it's 5.5 yards deeper than without it. So he's hunting deep ball off play action. I know it's early in the season, but Washington is outside the top 100 in EPA per pass allowed. Let's keep an eye on Jaden Reed. We kind of hinted around that. If you watch the game against Akron, he suffered a nasty cut and puncture on his back sliding into the bench. If you looked at the Akron player, he gets up from the bench and kind of examines what happened there, and he looks at his back, and you see his eyes. It's like, ooh. So we have to monitor Jaden Reed's status here.
There is no doubt that Michigan State's passing attack goes with Jaden Reed as Peyton Thorne looks to continue building chemistry with some of the other receivers. But much like we said on the BYU-Oregon game, hey, look, this is a litmus test. This is a data point that you can lean on. We'll get a better indication of who Michigan State and Washington are going to be going forward in the wake of Saturday's game up there in Seattle. A team who unfortunately, gentlemen, showed its warts last weekend would be Texas A&M, losing outright at home to Appalachian State as a favorite who got bet from 17 up to 19. Hard to cover 19 when you only score 14 points in the football game. They'll welcome in the Miami Hurricanes in a game that'll take place a lot later than any of us anticipated, 9 o'clock Eastern, so you have to imagine Kyle Field will be at full throat for this contest. A&M, a 5.5-point favorite. Total in the game, 45.5. You have seen some under money come in on the initial wave. Miami, they're looking to try and form an identity. Mario Cristobal wants to instill them with physicality and changing the culture a little bit. Meanwhile, the Canes have won 7 of their last 8 games going back to last season, including each of their last 4. The Aggies, you'd have to think that was rock bottom last week against the Mountaineers. The loss snapped a streak of 37 straight home wins versus unranked non-conference opponents. And Brad, we never want to overreact, but we also don't want to underreact early in the season from a power rating standpoint. What kind of changes did you make to A&M in the wake of that dismal offensive performance where they weren't even able to run 40 plays from scrimmage?
Yeah, I downgraded them 3 points in my power ratings, which is pretty significant. I'm not super aggressive like some people are. So usually 3 points is unless there's an injury, is about as far down as I go as I continue to figure out this A&M team. I think the downgrade obviously is on the offensive side of the ball, which maybe shouldn't come as any surprise considering Jimbo Fisher and his futility calling plays. I mean, it's not 1995 anymore. I mean, he calls a game like it was a generation ago. But main thing, I thought they would get better quarterback play. I mean, I was not a big Zach Calzada fan, besides obviously him having the game of his life against Alabama last year. I thought they'd be better no matter who played quarterback, whether it was Haynes King, Max Johnson, or heck, even the freshman. I thought they'd get better production. And on the surface, just the general stats, looks okay for King. 65% completions, 9 yards per pass attempt. But my goodness, last week, 97 passing yards against App State. I mean, who we saw the week before give up 63 points to North Carolina. I mean, threw 2 bad picks against Sam Houston, who's actually down this year at the FCS level. I mean, that's been the major downgrade for me. That Texas A&M offense that I expected to be better than last year does not look like it whatsoever through the first 2 games.
Brett, I want to double back to you and Payne, then I want to get your take, obviously, being all too familiar with Jimbo Fisher and the way he leads an offense. Were you surprised Jimbo went in the direction he did, naming Haynes King the starter over Max Johnson, and then through the first 2 games, not leaning on his mobility at all, knowing that can be the differentiator that makes Haynes King a little tougher to defend?
Excellent question. I am surprised because, watching the spring game, I had the feeling like, Max Johnson being more veteran would be, able to handle Jimbo's coaching better. He just, I don't know, he just seemed like a guy that would probably limit some bad plays and not have a lot of boneheaded mistakes. So I was surprised originally that Haynes King won the job. And I thought, well, he won the job because he's an explosive athlete. They'll run him a lot more, and why not run him? You have an experienced quarterback as your backup, so why not utilize him in the run game? Just have it. I know King's listed at 6'3", 200. He doesn't look it. I can tell you that. So I don't know. I don't know what Jimbo's done the first 2 games, but I could say that for pretty much any the last couple, any games the last 4 or 5 years of him calling plays.
I mean, Payne, it's been more of the same for Jimbo Fisher. The team wasn't much better all of last season. They averaged less than 400 yards per game. They were 88th in passing at a shade more than 200 contests, 56th in scoring. A&M went 8-4 last season, which obviously isn't going to keep their proud alumni base happy, but the bigger red flag, they scored 24 points or fewer in 6 games. Now, I know Jimbo, in the wake of that disappointment on Saturday, talked about in time evaluating potentially changing play callers. Look, we know that's not going to be the case. I think all of us would be shocked, but what does Jimbo have to do to light a fire under this offense to allow them to start scratching the surface on their true potential, knowing that there are difference makers on every single level?
Yeah, there are some guys here that can actually play, believe it or not, when you recruit at that level. It might not look that way, but there's some dudes out there. I think the interesting thing here with the offense is the game within the game. Right, Jimbo Fisher versus Kevin Steele. And they've actually had some battles recently. When Jimbo obviously got to A&M, Steele was at Auburn. In 2018, Steele held Jimbo's A&M offense to 0.16 EPA per play. Steele made some nice halftime adjustments in that game, held A&M scoreless the final 25 minutes. You go to 2019, Steele held Jimbo's A&M offense to 0.08 EPA per play. A&M had 3 points heading into the fourth quarter. So he's been able to stifle him a little bit. Certainly Jimbo got the better of Steele in 2020. That was kind of the year of chaos, COVID, Auburn fired Gus Malzahn, and Kevin Steele took over as an interim head coach, and Jimbo kind of spotted the dead horse and finally got some revenge on Kevin Steele. But Steele, when there's a normal environment, has done quite well against Jimbo Fisher offenses. But, when I look at this after digging into some of these situations, it makes a world of sense to me on why this total's opened at a peak of 50.5 and we're now down to 45. And the one thing that I actually like the best of doing this podcast, and Todd, you and I bitch from time to time
all the time.
I always like to see how long it takes for things that the three of us say to go national. And I think all three of us had made jokes about Jimbo's offense for half a decade, if not more. I mean, we're talking about Jimbo's loose leaf sheets of paper at Florida State blowing across the field and how he refuses to increase play rates despite having better athletes, and Jimbo's unwillingness to dumb down the offense to a college level. There are things within this offense that aren't very good for young quarterbacks learning on the job, and that to me was shocking again that Max Johnson wasn't the guy, especially since we saw in the spring game that Max Johnson had some wheels for his size. I believe he ripped off like a 60-yard touchdown run. So the difference between Haynes King's legs and Max Johnson's legs weren't substantial enough to overcome the difference in passing ability. And, let's see if there is a change at quarterback to Max Johnson. If it is still Haynes King, you guys hit it perfectly. Jimbo needs to use his best attributes. That's his legs. He's not a pocket quarterback. How Haynes King has only attempted 7 passes on play action bootlegs the last 2 seasons is beyond me. And I know the data and the sample size is small, but he's averaging 8 yards an attempt and a 71% success rate when you use play action bootlegs. Like, get the guy out, right? If Haynes King is under center and you're not doing those things to enhance his game, this gets a little bit more difficult. Now, the positive for A&M is they're going to be well rested offensively after just 40 snaps, right? You starting center, Bryce Foster, returns after missing the last 2 weeks with mono. He is the vocal leader of this unit. We've seen the offensive line play look a little bit disorganized. Potentially getting your starter back is a nice little uptick there for A&M offensively. And then you look at some of the other things, right? Like 29% of A&M's runs have been stuffed at or behind the line of scrimmage through 2 games. So that needs to improve. Sam Houston, App State have a combined to generate 16% front 7 havoc against A&M. So the offensive line also has not played to the level we anticipated. If you get your center back and he's not lost 20 pounds dealing with mono the last 2 weeks, that would be, I think, a substantial upgrade that has to be factored a little bit here. But the one thing I will say, because I've dealt with this, Jimbo Fisher, when it comes to his back being against the wall, or it is a monster recruiting weekend with kids on campus, and Ruben Owens, a guy that is currently committed to Louisville, is going to be on campus this week, his teams tend to show up. That's the one thing you can say about Jimbo. When his back's against the wall, or he knows it's a monster recruiting weekend, it's usually a good performance. I think we'll see a little bit more energy and effort.
Well, I'm glad there's a silver lining for A&M, because that breakdown you guys provided for one side of the ball was awfully depressing. And I'm not sure folks that live and die with A&M football are going to feel that much more confident going into this week. But the reason they could feel confident, the strength of A&M has indeed been its defense. A&M has held 4 of their last 6 opponents to 17 points or less. They've allowed just 2 touchdowns in 23 drives so far this season, forced 3 and out on 43% of their defensive series. So there is reason to believe that they can make life difficult for Tyler Van Dyke on the other side of the ball. Brad, do we have any concerns that Mario Cristobal is going to try and rein in his very talented quarterback, given the past track record we've seen of Justin Herbert at Oregon and some other quarterbacks, that he's going to adopt a run-first mentality in hostile territory Saturday night?
I would not put it past him. Let's just put it that way. and speaking of Miami's offense, I'm not sure what to expect from Miami's offense just yet, because I think the theme of this podcast is, data points or maybe lack of good data points so far. And I'll say this with Miami, with the schedule of Bethune-Cookman and Southern Miss, I'm not sure that we really know what Miami's offense is capable of. I will say this. If you're just reading final scores, you thought, hey, Miami pretty much played to expectation last week against Southern Miss. I'm here to tell you they didn't. In fact, it was really bad. We're talking in the final minutes of the first half, they're trailing Southern Miss 7-3, and they can't protect Tyler Van Dyke. They give up 4 sacks in the game. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good look when you're facing a very talented Texas A&M defensive line. Sure, Miami has the quarterback advantage in this one significantly with Van Dyke, but as you mentioned, he also had a guy that I thought from his first couple of starts at Oregon, I said to myself, this is the first pick of the NFL draft. That's how good Justin Herbert looked, and yet he regressed throughout his career, especially his last few years under Cristobal after starting off with Taggart. So I have my doubts on Miami's effectiveness on the offense side of the ball in this game.
Payne, you have taught me well over the years. You said third down efficiency isn't always an indicator of future success. And while the Canes have converted 65% of their third down opportunities, man, it's got to be a red flag that they had to go 9 of 17 against Southern Miss, that they found themselves behind the down and distance 17 times throughout the course of the game.
Brad said he was shocked that Justin Herbert didn't end up being the first pick of the draft. I'm sad he wasn't the 5th pick of the draft.
You've got Tua. Learn to love him.
I haven't been impressed with Miami's offense, and I'm glad that Brad said it, because obviously everyone knows the joke here is that I'm a Florida State homer, but we know that's not accurate, right? I'm very unbiased with these breakdowns because our money is on the line here. In the context of Southern Miss outside our top 100 in Bethune, one of the worst HBCU programs there is, I didn't see much here. And we can say Josh Gaddis is playing things close to the vest against inferior opponents, but this is a brand new Miami offense that's completely different from what Rhett Lashley ran. And these are valuable reps. What I am seeing is Van Dyke has trouble processing this offense so far. He's late on throws. The Hurricanes receiver group is having real trouble separating on the outside. I mean, Miami's running flea flickers against Southern Miss to create explosives. It's a 10-point game late third quarter. Miami's towards the bottom of the country in schedule-adjusted explosiveness. They've been poor on early downs, as you alluded to, Todd, outside the top 100 in bypassing first downs against this type of defenses through 2 weeks. And I keep coming back to this. Rhett Lashley ran a very quarterback-friendly offense. It's paint by number. I believe Van Dyke's a solid quarterback with nice traits, but the sample size we have doesn't lead me to believe he's the third best quarterback behind Young and Stroud, like so many media members wanted us to believe this offseason. And, Canes fans were dying to get De'Aaron King back last season, and Jake Garcia was going to be the savior of the program. Van Dyke was a third-string quarterback heading into last year. He's played lots of horrific defenses, Central Connecticut, Virginia, North Carolina. And when Van Dyke did play a solid defense, it was at home against NC State's defense down 5 starters. He did show well for a half against Pittsburgh, probably his most impressive effort. But you even go back to the final 4 games last season, where Van Dyke played Georgia Tech's defense outside the top 100 in schedule-adjusted efficiency. Duke, 118th. Va-Tech packed it in with a lame duck coach. The only defense Van Dyke played the final 4 games that was trending well was Florida State, and Van Dyke was horrific through first 3 quarters of that game. Now he starts this season against Bethune and Southern Miss. I'm just saying pump the brakes here a little bit. I think the traits are good, but learning a brand new offense, he doesn't look good in it. He really hasn't played stiff competition. A&M's going to be the best defense Van Dyke's played by a long mile. Against Southern Miss last week, Van Dyke had a 12% turnover-worthy play rate from a clean pocket. Okay? I just don't see some of these things that the outside world sees with these quarterbacks, and we hit it perfectly last week with Anthony Richardson. The other thing for A&M here is all signs point to both McKinley Jackson and Walter Nolan returning to A&M's defensive line. Let's also keep an eye on the projected starter Jalen Jones at corner. Return to practice Monday in a limited fashion would be a huge get back for this game. Fresh bodies, right? That's the key, because that is the one advantage Miami does have, because A&M was on the field for 83 snaps, 42 minutes, in 94-degree Texas heat last week. That is the one advantage Miami has offensively, but it is good to get some of these fresh bodies back that are huge players, especially along the defensive line, because Brad mentioned the O-line for Miami hasn't been as good as we anticipated. We thought they upgraded that unit a little bit. There's some big bodies there. You have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. It hasn't been as good as we thought for the first 2 weeks.
Keep in mind, this is a game that looked like it was going to be 6.5, 7 leading up to it. We've obviously in the market correct itself a little bit. So you believe in A&M's ability to bounce back. There is a little bit of value to be extracted there. Payne, of course, highlighted the total. That's seen one-way traffic down, although it did get as low as 44 at one prominent shop. And that apparently was a number that it was not willing to cross, as there was some buyback pushing it back to 45.5. And if you talk about quarterbacks with optimism for Miami fans, as far as how Tyler Van Dyke forecasts in the pros, there is one fan base that's ready to erect statues, shrines, anything else they can after just 2 games watching their new transfer quarterback. And that, of course, would be the USC Trojans, who will welcome in-state program Fresno State. You're looking at USC, an 11.5-point favorite, more or less the consensus. There are some 12s and 12.5s out there. This total has ticked up a shade from 70 on the opener at some books out to 74.5. Others did open a little bit higher as well. Obviously, this is a high-powered matchup capable of showing all sorts of fireworks between quarterbacks that, in my opinion, can go out there and put up numbers in bunches, defenses that'll clearly be tested. When you look at Fresno, they have had modest ATS success over their last 7 meetings against Pac-12 opponents. They've gone 6-1 against the number. Of course, that win streak came to an end as Jonathan Smith elects to go for it in the waning seconds last week at Fresno State, leading Oregon State to a modest victory. 3 outright wins. 2 of those have come as a favorite for Fresno. This will no doubt be a big test. And Jay Kaner, gentlemen, has not been shy, saying he grew up a USC fan. They said he was too small. They didn't recruit him. He did it with a smirk on his face. And I have to imagine, Brad, Fresno State, having watched Stanford go up and down the field for the first 30 minutes up on the farm last week, leads Jeff Tedford to believe that this offense can have some success against a rebuilding Trojans defense.
No question about it. I get it. Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley, Jordan Addison are grabbing all the headlines right now. But I think the concerning thing, if I'm a USC fan, not only for this game, but even next week, I think could be trouble in Corvallis, is a defense that, quite frankly, very fortunate to only allow 28 points against a questionable offensive mind, at least in 2022 standards, David Shaw. The fact that Stanford, turned it over inside USC's 5-yard line, not once, but twice early on in that game, was a big major reason why USC got off to such a fast start. Otherwise, I'll say this, guys. It only took 2 games, but, USC looks like Oklahoma already under Lincoln Riley. Just what they've been the last 4 or 5 years. All offense, no defense. USC's just out-talenting everybody on the outside so far. But one of the major red flags for me is obviously turnovers. And USC already number 1 in the country in turnover margin, +9. And I'm here to tell you, a lot of it's been fluky. I already mentioned the Stanford turnovers in the red zone. The week prior was ridiculous. USC gets 3 pick sixes. That's not like great athletic plays by the defense. It was more deflected passes, lucky bounces. So because of that, maybe this game isn't perfect, but I'm looking, maybe no surprise. I'm looking to take advantage and go against this USC team.
Payne, do you want to defend your man Alex Grinch from all the shade that Brad is throwing his direction?
There's not many dudes on that side of the ball. And I think when we're assessing USC this season, those were some of the concerns that we had coming into the year. You looked at the transfers that they brought in defensively. They weren't even really key contributors at their last stop. And then you had Foreman, who was the highly rated prospect last year. You saw him in a knee brace during the spring game, and he said, yeah, I had a slight knee dislocation. I didn't know knee dislocations were slight. So the defensive line isn't really all that great. The corners, decent. But I think when you look at this game, I'm kind of leaning Brad's way here with Fresno. Our projections of Fresno's defense, along with the first real data point against Oregon State at home, doesn't, project to a unit that's going to have a ton of success stopping USC's offense unless, the turnover regression hits the Trojans hard here. So I think if you're looking at Fresno staying within this 12.5 point spread, it's got to be on Jay Kaner. It's got to be on the Fresno offense to keep up here. And the way USC's defense has actually played wouldn't be a total surprise. I know on the surface it looks like USC's defense has played well, but that's just not reality. Both Rice and Stanford turned the ball over, was it 8 times in 8 quarters, most of which weren't forced. Tipped balls, you name it. 3 of the 8 turnovers USC returned for defensive touchdowns. 2 of them were turnovers inside USC's 4-yard line last week. And if you look on average, the 8 turnovers have happened 21 yards away from either goal line. So right outside the red zone on average. USC's defense also has 2 more turnovers on downs that were created. So I don't see it here defensively in year 1 for Alex Grinch. And then if you look at the down-to-down metrics against Rice, they had some success early on. That wasn't an offense we projected inside the top 100 heading into the season. I know Stanford's kind of changed their mindset offensively with David Shaw. I think he's kind of adhering to the times a little bit more. That's at least what he's saying. They showed extremely well last week, right? That's an offense we projected outside our top 50. Stanford had a 51% success rate, a 14% explosive play rate against USC. The Trojans only forced Stanford to go 3 and out on one of their 11 offensive possessions. So if Fresno can get out there with Jake Haener and protect Haener, right? Oregon State did pressure on 40% of dropbacks last week. That might be the lone concern. Haener's a guy that's willing to attack, right? He knows where the ball needs to go. He can read defenses. I think he's going to be able to make some plays against USC's defense that is a defense that wants to play man coverage and be aggressive. And if you look at Tanner McKee for Stanford last week, he chewed up USC's secondary more than a 22 yards per completion when USC chose to play man coverage. I think if Haener brings the A game, and it sounds like, per your quote, Todd, this is a game that he's circled, that he's going to be ready for, there's going to be some opportunities for Fresno's offense to hang some points.
Yeah, and you know what? I bastardized the quote earlier, so I'll read it verbatim from what I took down earlier, and this is from Haener directly. USC was the team that I grew up rooting for, and they never gave me a chance to go play there, and now I get to go play on a big stage. There's really nothing to be nervous about. No one expects us to win. The only people that expect us to win are the people in this locker room, the people in this facility, so I'm just going to go prepare like I always do and play with a chip on my shoulder, make great decisions, stay in the moment, stay present. If I can stay patient and take what they give me early and stay in the flow of the game, the shots will present themselves against this defense. So clearly a quarterback that came back to Fresno State, had a chance to go to Washington, that no doubt has had this game circled on his calendar. Now, gentlemen, I do live in a house that is going to be cheering for USC, maybe not me if I end up on Fresno State, so I need to have a glass half full mentality for the Trojan fans that are out there. Does Fresno State's defense have any of the pieces capable of slowing down what USC wants to do offensively, Brad?
In a word, no. I question it because, I mean, there's just, kudos for Lincoln Riley for taking advantage of the transfer portal. There's too many guys at not only wide receiver, but also running back where he can just filter in one after another. I am not very confident in Fresno's success in this one. I think what it's setting up, if Fresno's going to have it, some success in this game, it reminds me eerily similar to last year's UCLA game when Fresno really relied on Jake Haener to play hero ball, and he delivered, and Fresno went in to the Rose Bowl and got an outright win. I think you're going to see a very similar high-scoring type of game where he's either going to have to will Fresno to win because you can't rely on the Fresno defense to stop this USC offense right now.
Payne, I'll leave it to you to close this game up. When I look at the number, both side and total, you're better reading the tea leaves than I am. Where do you think this number goes? Do you think we start to see money come in on Fresno State, meaning 13 isn't going to be available if folks want to bet the dog? Or can you see a scenario knowing that this is one of the late games, Saturday night at Chase contest? If you like the underdog, wait it out, and if you like the favorite, bet it now.
Yeah, I don't know, and I think this is the ultimate question because USC has been all the hype. It is the 10:30 game, the big game. And you ultimately don't know what the public is, the influence they may have on this, but you're already seeing sharp shops trend towards below the 13, right? So I don't know if there's a shot of getting 14. I would absolutely love that. And I think the entire breakdown that we've done, and we've started it as a quick hitter, right, to talk about how Fresno can stay in this game, and it's all predicated on their offense because we're not sure how many stops they get. And we believe USC's defense is vastly overrated based on some of the turnover luck they've had thus far. So it is the least bit shocking to see this total get hit over earlier in the week. It started at 68.5 at some shops, now as high as 74. Brad, are you a part of the over?
I am not. I'm not a big over guy. Big shocker there. It is the highest total in college football this season. And I will say this, being a trend guy, totals in the 70s haven't done so well here, recently in college football. 2-0 to the under this year. Going back to last year, if you blindly play the under in any total lined in the 70s, you're 24-11. So I'm a little pessimistic when it comes to playing overs on high totals.
You definitely need a number of things to go right to have games see 10-plus touchdowns like this total suggests. We'll see if Fresno State, who moved the ball with relative ease against Oregon State but bogged down in the red zone, can't be kicking field goals if they're going to have a chance to knock the Trojans from the ranks of the unbeaten. You can follow Brad on Twitter. That's at BradPower7. You can follow Payne there as well, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Brad, before we let you go off into the abyss for additional prep for college football week 3, any other nuggets or tidbits you'd like to share with the loyal Bet the Board listeners?
I want to congratulate Mr. Todd Fuhrman, who just passed a major milestone. I don't know if you guys, even if Todd's aware of this, but Todd just passed 150,000 followers. 150,000 on Twitter, so congrats, my friend.
Thanks. There are a lot of degenerate bettors out there. I think 140,000 of those folks like to tell me I suck every single day of the week. Heaven forbid a best bet loses. There's no doubt they come from the hilltops to scream it. But I appreciate that and wouldn't be possible without a lot of the great content we do around here and the listeners that have been with us, some of them from way back in 2014. Brad, best of luck this weekend. Can't thank you enough, as always, for your great contributions here. There's no doubt for the first 3 weeks, you get more than a passing grade helping us take our podcast to the next level for the 2022 college football season.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
You know, Payne, I'm honestly shocked. Brad says something nice to me at the end of the show. I'm sure you had to bite your lip. Maybe you bit your tongue that you're bleeding right now. I figured that would have been the perfect avenue or opportunity for you to fire a pot shot.
Well, you sent me a DM overnight, which I got a chance to look at this morning, and I said, Todd went to 150,000 followers. Let me drum up something in my head to take a little pot shot at him. And Brad swoops in and mentions it. And I think he's going for a left hook, and instead just a nice little gentle finger roll at the rim, complimenting you for 150,000. But I do know Brad's a big Twitter guy. How many stadiums does 150,000 Twitter followers fill? Like, does that fill all of the stadiums?
I think it fills pretty much every stadium. I'm still not able to sell out the Indianapolis 500. I don't believe. I'm not quite sure where like Bristol Motor Speedway is. That may be towards the top, or Azteca down in Mexico City. But as far as college football goes, I think I've got my bases covered.
I can't figure it out. I'm around you every day. I cannot believe 150,000 people would willingly want to be in your presence.
We never said willingly want to be in my presence. They're just, like I said, out there to remind me.
They hit the follow button. They're not being
They're out there to remind me I'm an ass
follow.
bag and to tell me that I say stupid shit all the time. So that's exactly why they're there, so they can pounce on every one of my missteps. So thank you to Brad.
Well, let me be honest to everyone. You can unfollow now. I tell Todd that plenty via text every day.
I'm going to laugh when this podcast goes long and there's like 7,000 people that have unfollowed at the word of Payne, trying to establish the Bet the Board army and get them all mobilized in one direction or another. But yes, thank you to Brad, and thank you to all of our loyal listeners. No chance we would have a social community as large as we do without all the great interactions that you guys provide week in, week out throughout the course of this season and previous seasons, rain or shine, win or lose, as the case may be. All right, we broke down a bevy of games. We shared a little bit of feedback on some of the marquee matchups that we saw last weekend. Of course, we do have one final thing to accomplish, and it's getting off the schneid into the win column with a best bet.
I believe this should go better than last week. Now, boy, all of the elements you would want as a bettor were fulfilled there. It's taking 4 and watching a game close 2, getting in on a game before 2 key injuries were announced publicly, which we had information of. And then at that point, you just need one of 2 kickers to make one of 4 kicks, and we're in there. But that is
incredible, man. Early
season variance at its finest. This game that we're going to, and Todd and I have discussed this probably too much at length. It's ugly.
We did have 4 candidates, by the way, that we had to pare down to the ultimate answer.
Yes. It's ugly, but we're going to go with rotation number 124, the Nebraska Huskers plus 11.5, hosting the Oklahoma Sooners. Listen, they showed well last season in this matchup, and I think ultimately this is about a numbers play. I understand that it's come down a little bit off the open, but if these teams were to play last week, we make it Oklahoma minus 7.5 on a neutral. We know Nebraska has a very good home field advantage. We typically see a tick up after a coaching firing. It fires up the rest of the locker room. And I'll be honest, Todd, I haven't been ultimately that impressed with Oklahoma's offense. I struggled last week against Kent State very early. The UTEP win not looking all that impressive after a couple data points. And then there's also the element of where we think this total may go. It looks like 16-mile-per-hour winds. Oklahoma is certainly a pass-first offense, so that will impact that. But points do become more valuable as this total ticks down a little bit, which I envision happening.
The other thing in this game, too, I know a lot of people may not be enamored with the interim head coach for Nebraska. Let's be honest here. What was Scott Frost doing to make this team better over the first couple of games of this season and in the past? I almost feel like it's addition by subtraction, or worst case scenario, it's a net neutral in terms of overall coaching impact.
I would agree. There are some things that I would rather not share on this podcast, but Scott Frost has been quite distracted. Let's just put it that way.
Hey, sometimes those extracurricular pursuits get the best of all of us. So that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Women weaken legs.
But in the spirit of the podcast, you guys know we gravitate towards the ugly ducklings, and it's buying stock when nobody else wants a piece of it. Nebraska fits that bill perfectly this week. I did have one question, though, Payne, before we close up shop and officially bid our listeners a fond farewell for 24 hours. When you look at games in the current...
It's 11:45 in the morning. I don't field questions after 11:44.
Well, it's too bad because you're going to have to field it anyways, or you can plead the fifth. When you look at the way the betting markets have gone in the current iteration, evolution, whatever terms we want to use, when you're looking at openers trying to decide, one book opens a lot higher than the rest of the market. Are we supposed to use that as the opener, or do we look at the overall market consensus where this number opened widely available at 12.5 to 13 for some of those folks and be like, oh, we can't believe you guys are just taking 11.5?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the game opened 14.5 most places, did open 16 one place, and got pummeled immediately by someone, we associate with, clearly. But the 14.5 lasted about 7 minutes.
Yep.
So when you're sitting here evaluating a podcast in the current market at 11.5, we still think there's value there. Again, a week ago, and that's why I started it with that. A week ago, this is 7.5 on a neutral. So I think there's value here, and there's still some juice in this number in that, we made it under double digits.
That's fair.
Value there, the spot's good. Ultimately, 0.001% of bettors obtained plus 16. I would say 0.002% of bettors obtained plus 14.5.
And a fair assessment, and I just wanted to get that out there because I know inevitably people will ask, and we're here not only to give people an indication of our thought process in breaking down some of the big games, but also philosophies, the way we view the betting market, and so much more, which puts us in a cut above. All right, my friend.
What happened here, by the way, is a week ago, Todd gets a little antsy and starts tweeting about kickers for the Florida-Kentucky game, and it comes back to bite us 3 hours later. Ultimately, after Todd's proposed that question, the game's going to fall 12 now. If you want someone to blame, just directly shoot Todd a note, and he'll handle all of your inquiries.
I wish I had that much power over the universe. It would be a scary proposition specifically for you and a lot of our listeners as well, but I will not claim to have that level of control. So, all right, for Payne Insider, you can follow him on Twitter. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Follow Brad Powers, of course, Brad Powers 7. Most importantly, the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. We'll be right back with you tomorrow for the National Football League Week 2. But come Saturday afternoon, we'll call it sometime afternoon, out here on the West Coast with a Nebraska ticket in hand, we will see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.